This is Emily Hull with the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at the OSU Library. Today is Friday, August 24th, 2018, and I'm in Tulsa today interviewing Jennifer Latham for the Deep Roots Oklahoma Authors Oral History Project. Jennifer, you're the author of the novels Scarlet Undercover and Dreamland Burning. You're also an avid people watcher and researcher. Thanks for taking the time to talk to me.
It's great to be here. Thank you for coming to talk to me.
So where were you born and where did you grow up?
I was born on the Upper East Side of New York, but I don't remember it at all because my father was in the military. He was going to medical school there. And right after he graduated, we moved to San Francisco and lived on the Presidio there for 4 or 5 years while he did his training, his post-medical school training. And after that, we moved quite a bit. We went to West Point, New York, which was my favorite, and Augusta, Georgia. And we didn't move quite as much as a lot of military families did because of what he did. He was a pathologist. But we ended up in Buffalo, New York. That's where I went to high school, and that is close to where both of my parents grew up, which was just about 2.5 hours east of there in Elmira. And my mother lived in a little tiny town in Pennsylvania just over the border, but Elmira was the biggest.
So what was it about, did you say West Point, New York, that you liked? Why was that your favorite?
It had everything. It's the Army's officer college.
Right.
But when you live there as a kid, you just know that you can go swimming at one of 5 or 6 pools and ponds with lifeguards or ice skating rink, and everything is free. So you just go. There was a ski slope. The school was just up the hill from me, so I could walk. It was just its own self-contained world, and I was at the age where I could get on my bike and just go anywhere or take the bus if it was further away. And that was back when your mother wanted you to leave the house and did not care where you went so long as you came home in the evening.
Right. Have that freedom. So tell me more about your parents. You mentioned that your father was a physician. What was his name and what's he like?
He's passed away. He was complicated. His name was Charles Besancini, but then it became Carrie Besancini later in life, and I think it went back to Charles at the end. So he struggled with mental illness through his life, even though it wasn't necessarily acknowledged. It was more, he never went to see people. When I lived at home, I went to graduate school in psychology, and I finally decided on what I thought it was he had, which was narcissistic personality disorder with some other fun stuff mixed in. But he was a really intelligent, very self-destructive person who made himself feel better by making other people feel worse. So when I watch the news now, it's a little PTSD-ish.
But how about your mom?
She, her name is Kathy. It was Kathy Palmer, then it became Kathy Besancini, and now it's Kathy Palmer again. And she was a registered nurse until she got married. Then she became a mom, moved around a lot, and now she actually lives back in the house she grew up in, which I love. She just moved in there this summer, which is in Mosherville, Pennsylvania.
Oh, wow. What's that? What's her house like?
Well, it's not exactly like it was. It's the only house left in my life that I've been going to ever since I was born. So it stayed exactly the same until my grandmother passed away.
Oh, wow.
And then
unusual.
It was so nice. They did add a bathroom because it had one bathroom, even though 5 kids had grown up in the house. But my cousin had bought it after she passed away and did some renovations. He's a carpenter. And now Mom's in it, so it's just this really strange. It's the same space that I always visited, but with a touch of my cousin, because he did things like paint walls colors that my mother wouldn't. But it's all my mom's stuff in there, so it doesn't smell exactly the same, but it feels like home when I go visit.
Do you have any siblings?
I have 2 brothers. Todd is 6 years younger than me, and he's a teacher. He lives just over the French border and works in Switzerland. And he has 2 daughters and is married to a woman named Valerie. She's from the Netherlands. And I have another brother, Matt, who still lives in a suburb outside Buffalo, and he runs a landscaping business.
How would you describe your brothers?
Since I was so much older than them, they were pests.
Yeah.
So, I love them, but it feels like they have a really distinct life from me. They were home when my parents got divorced. They went through a lot that I didn't. I kind of got out before my dad really started to disintegrate and things got tough. So I'm not super close with them, and they live, Todd lives really far away.
Yeah.
But they're both really interesting people from the experiences they had growing up.
Yeah. How about grandparents? Were you close to grandparents?
Yeah, and I was really lucky. I knew my great-grandparents, a couple of them also. But, okay, so let's see. We'll start with Mom's parents, since I already mentioned my grandmother. They grew up in this really small town, Mosierville, in Pennsylvania. And my grandmother ended up being bank president's secretary. And she's, she should have been the bank president. It just wasn't an option for her then. Yeah. But my grandfather, her name was Virginia Palmer. And my grandfather was Bud Palmer, even though it was Lawrence. Didn't go by that. And he did manufacturing for a while. And he ended up doing carpentry and hitting the tail end of auctions when they sell off the box lots. And he would just find treasures and turn something that looked awful in somebody's barn or basement into something beautiful. And then my other grandparents, they lived really nearby, but they were the fancy version in Elmira in the city. And my grandfather, Nort Sonsony, owned part of a company called American LaFrance. And so LaFrance builds fire engines, but he owned the part of the business that did all the auxiliary stuff like firemen's jackets and helmets and the stuff that went along with the trucks. And my grandmother, Betty Sonsony, was a teacher, and they met in grade school. They knew each other forever. So she taught while Grandpa was in World War II. Both my grandfathers were in World War II. And they lived together, bickering and loving each other until they died.
What were they like in terms of their personalities that you can recall?
I think they were really shaped by their generations. The Palmers didn't have a lot of money, but family meant so much to them, and they had 5 kids. My grandmother baked. That was how she showed you love. My grandfather would pull these pieces of jewelry out of the auction lots he got, and he wanted to make little pocket knives. He wanted to make sure that his grandkids got little things that mattered. They were just very warm and loving. And I remember we walked in once, and my grandfather, they didn't know we were there, and Grandpa Palmer swatted Grandma in the butt, like an affectionate kind of swat. And they were in their 80s, and it was just like, great, that's awesome. That's still a part of their private relationship that we got to peek in on.
Yeah. Was there a particular thing she baked that?
Sugar cookies,
Okay.
Soft sugar cookies.
Specialty?
Yes, she had one recipe with sour cream, one without. And she would bake either one for you.
Yeah, that sounds good. Was there anything that your grandpa found for you, like as a present that you can recall that you really liked?
My favorite is both the tables in our house are from him. Our kitchen table he gave us as a wedding gift. And that's my favorite because I know it was a real disaster when he found it. He put a lot of love into that. And the Basansonis, they were the same way. They just adored each other all the way through. They had a little bit more money because my grandpa he didn't go to college. He started off as a draftsman and worked his way up in the company. But it was the same thing. Family meant a lot to them. They made sure our Christmases were great. They would come visit, and Christmas was always fun. I kind of miss it now. They were much more self-identified as Republicans, but they were Ronald Reagan Republicans, and it was interesting to see when I see things happening now. I think back to them and what their version was of. They didn't like paying taxes, but they still understood that they paid for the police, and they were extremely generous people. So I always think of them, they were always dressed properly, and the house was always very clean, and Graham overcooked her pork chops to the point where you had to gnaw on them. But they were just really warm, wonderful people.
So what do you recall about your early schooling? So you moved around a bit as a kid. Any like favorite teachers or a certain teacher that maybe encouraged your writing?
There were a couple. The first school I went to was in San Francisco, and there was a base school at the Presidio, but I think my parents pulled I don't know. They got me into a school that was predominantly Chinese American.
Oh.
So that was kind of an interesting way to start off. And that was in the city of San Francisco proper. And my friend Diane Lau was there, and her grandma would cook for us. Her grandma didn't speak English, but she would cook these amazing meals. So I had I can't remember her name, Christy, and my mom still uses her cutout cookie recipe at Christmas. But I remember my kindergarten teacher was just really warm and wonderful. But the teacher who really got me writing more, her name was Miss Teetsy, and she's still around. I found her on Facebook.
Oh, really?
She was my second grade teacher at West Point Elementary. And every Friday from when we got back from lunch on, it was writing time. And so we each had our own spiral-bound notebook, and we could decorate it with stickers. And she would give us a mimeographed piece of paper that still smelled like the mimeograph machine with a little drawing on it and a little story prompt. And we just got to spend the whole afternoon working on that story. And kids who preferred drawing to writing could draw, but with a little bit of writing. And I think that's where I first started to actually put stories down on paper.
Did you keep diaries or journals or kind of keep track of things like that? The writing? No.
I didn't. My kids do now. I have a daughter who is a manic journaler.
Oh, really? Yeah. I think you either are or you're not.
Yeah.
I think there's really no in between.
Well, the thing was, with my father being the way he was, I wasn't allowed. So he would edit things that I wrote, and I didn't write an awful lot as a kid, other than Miss Teetsy's room. He would edit out the I's. He'd say, "You're using I too much."
Oh.
And so to journal, it would have never crossed my mind that what I had to say or what happened in my day mattered enough to write it down. That was just part of the way we were raised, is that we were not as important. You didn't say I.
Yeah. Oh.
So this is weird talking about myself.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. It's gonna be here a while. So what did you dream about becoming as a kid? Was an author one of your dreams, or was it something else?
Deep down, I'm sure it was. But that was, being an author, I think I understood even early on, you're putting yourself out there, and so much of you is in what you produce, that it's a risky job. And I don't know if I was ever tough enough or thick-skinned enough to do that until I had gotten some distance from my father. And so I wanted to be what every kid wants to be. I wanted to be a veterinarian or a marine biologist. And but I really didn't, because I couldn't just say, I'm going to be a writer, I'm going to go do the training, whatever it takes to be a writer. I just kind of skidded back and forth and did a lot of different things until I finally had the come to Jesus moment where I said, all right, it's either do this or write. So
yeah, that's what you did. What were your hobbies and interests as a kid?
I read a lot. I was always a chubby kid who got teased, and we moved, so I didn't have close friends that I'd grown up with. So I was the kid who was at the school library every day saying, what today? And I was about a novel a day kid. And other than that, I did a lot of sports. Not particularly well, but I liked them. I was a swimmer, so I was on swim teams a lot growing up.
So you've mentioned the writing you did in second grade as an early memory of writing something creative. Are there other memories you have of maybe writing short stories or things like that as you got a little older and through school?
Poetry was the most accessible. So I always had a notebook with poems in it. I loved buying 5-star, those big fat spiral notebooks, and I'd say, I'm going to fill this with poetry, and I'd fill 20 pages and then shelve it and buy a new one. But I got little hints going along. When I was in college, I wrote a paper, and it was supposed to be about Keynesian economics, and I ended up writing it as a fairy tale where King got his 2 sons to and they were representing 2 different economic theories. And I got the paper back, and it said A+ writing, B- economics. And the professor said, I fixed the economic parts, and I read this to my 2nd grade daughter. So I should have seen the lights going then, saying, not economics, but writing.
Yeah, that's great. So you mentioned that you're an avid reader as a kid. Is there a particular book or books that were really important to you kind of early on?
I was the Judy Blume generation, most definitely. But I think the book that shaped me the most and has influenced the way, or has showed me how I want to write, was Jacob Have I Loved by Catherine Patterson, which is about a girl growing up on, I think it's off the North Carolina shore, but she grows up basically hating her sister, who's her twin, because her sister gets all the attention. And I didn't have a sister, so there are no complicated things there, but she showed a character who was really imperfect and was thinking things that you're not supposed to think, like, I don't like my sister. And that was my first glimpse of how complicated characters could be.
Yeah.
And I didn't necessarily identify with Sarah Louise, but I felt like she's as complicated as I am. Like we all are.
Yeah. So what did you do after high school? Did you go directly to college or work for a little bit?
I did. I was the kid who did all her homework, so I was the nerd, and I went straight to college. I went to Swarthmore College, which is outside Philadelphia, and I did meet my husband there at the tail end, but that didn't happen for a while. So I went to college and I studied anthropology, which I loved because of The Clan of the Cave Bear, which I read. I can only place things by time. I read that when we lived in Georgia, so it had to have been 6th or 7th grade probably. And I just thought that was amazing. So I wanted to learn about our basically human evolution. Because that's what I studied. I studied birth and how humans' skull sizes and brain sizes and our bipedalism interplayed. So I did that. And I studied economics. And I got the degree in it. And I did that, left it behind.
So what did you do after you graduated from undergrad? Did you go straight to grad school or?
No, I got married pretty quick. So I did live in Spain when we were in college, and that was great to get away for a year. But when I came back, I met my husband, who had a girlfriend. And he knows, he doesn't care if I tell this story. He'd had the same girlfriend since he got there, first week freshman year. And she'd graduated a year ahead of us. And I didn't know him because they were always together. And even though it was a really small college, I had never talked with him. But we met through a mutual friend. And once we finally fessed up that, okay, we kind of like each other, even though you have this girlfriend, we got engaged a week later.
Oh, really?
Before he broke up with his girl. Or maybe, I think it might have been like the day after he finally called his girlfriend in California and did that. So I met Sean then, and I had no clue what I was going to do. So I went to Bryn Mawr College for half a semester. They have a post-baccalaureate pre-med program where if you did no pre-med courses in college, you could go cram them all in. Oh. So I stayed in Philadelphia, or in Bryn Mawr, and did this program. And Sean went to Providence, Rhode Island, to Brown to do grad school in English. And I went to visit him about halfway through the first semester. And I had a chemistry test the next day, and I was on the train and with my chemistry book and just like, I'm not going to do this anymore. So my very kind landlady let me out of my lease. I basically packed up all my books and clothes and drove to Providence. And then at the end of the semester, my parents helped me move out of that apartment. And then I lived in Rhode Island with Sean. And I had a lot of jobs there. I've always worked. It wasn't ever an option not to.
Yeah.
So I've had a job since I was 16. But once we got to Rhode Island, I temped. The thing that influenced me most was I worked in a year at a heroin detox. It was actually an anything detox, but we mostly saw heroin addicts coming through. And I did this with just my undergrad degree. And it was the state-funded facility. So the people who came in had no money. They had nowhere else to go. Some of them were court-ordered. And that is where I learned a lot working there. It lasted about a year. It's incredibly hard work. And heroin addicts they come back again and again. Some alcoholics came through, some people with cocaine addiction. Meth was not a thing. I never knew about meth till we moved here.
Oh, yeah.
But I would watch the moms come in and beg and plead for me to let them call their kids, and I couldn't unless it was set up with the social workers usually. And that's what really made me want to go to graduate school and train to work with kids. Was seeing these moms were, some of them were going to make it, and a lot of them were not.
Yeah. So you studied psychology?
I studied clinical psychology, but with an emphasis on school psychology. So the degree I didn't finish. I'm ABD, so all but dissertation. I did all of the coursework. I did my clinical training in a school. And then my dissertation, I had all the data for it. And then I got, I got pregnant, and I was pregnant with Ellie all through grad school, well, through my last year of grad school, and she was stillborn at 42 weeks. So that kind of slowed me down. I didn't go and do my training right after that. I needed to recover. But I wanted a baby right away after that. And so 5 months later, I was pregnant again. And that's Zoe. Zoe's here. She's safe and healthy. But it's traumatic getting pregnant that soon after. You go to the hospital thinking you're going to leave with your baby who's 2 weeks overdue. And you get there and there's no heartbeat. So that was literally what happened. It was awful. Yeah. So when I was pregnant with Zoe, I worked in a private school. I wasn't actually a school psychologist. I ran a learning center for kids who just needed a little extra boost. That was at Providence Country Day School. And I had Zoe. Sean got a job in Oklahoma, which was not what we were expecting, but it ended up being amazing. And I had a big mole on my ear while I was pregnant with Zoe, but I was not going to go to the doctor and have anything done. No Novocaine, no nothing to have it removed. So when she was 2 months old, I had it removed, and it came back as this really bizarre melanoma.
Oh, no.
And big melanoma. So it was not a good one. So here we are. Sean literally is getting calls and doing job interviews as I'm waiting for the biopsy to come back on this. Zoe's 2.5 months old. And then we find out we're going to Oklahoma. So in that crazy time, we bought our first house. Sean got his first job, had a brand new newborn. We went to Boston for treatment there at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. And I had to have my left ear cut down twice for them to get the clear margins on that tumor. And then we moved to Oklahoma. I still had stitches in my ear, which the plastic surgeon was kind enough to make dissolvable. So I could just go have them fall out. So when we moved here, I literally had just come out of the hospital, and Zoe was tiny. And there we were in Owasso, Oklahoma with our first house.
What was it like adjusting to life in Oklahoma with all of that other change?
With all the moving we did, I was never in the middle of the country. We always kind of went coast to coast, north and south. But so I had no idea what to expect. The night we got to Owasso, Sean said, I had asked him, please have somebody clean the house. We were broke. So paying a house cleaner to come in was a big deal, but I can't go and scrub corners and really get the house ready to move in. And he didn't do it. So he said, but I've got this great restaurant we'll go to. It'll be really nice. And Owasso there was nothing there. There was an Albertsons and a Walmart and a Chili's. That was literally it. And one other restaurant. So we get there. He said, this place is always packed. I think it's going to be really great. And he drove me to the Taco Bueno. And I'd been picturing this nice dinner. And so I'm standing in the Owasso Taco Bueno just weeping. And no disrespect to Taco Bueno, it's great. It just wasn't what I was expecting.
Yeah.
So I think that I was so tired and scared because I honestly didn't know if I was going to get to see Zoe grow up. That settling in, I was just shell-shocked from life, not Oklahoma. But we went to the Walmart, and Zoe was in her car seat to put in the cart, and I must have looked horrible, like exhausted and probably swollen-eyed. It was a couple weeks after we moved in, and Zoe she was a really good baby, but she just lost it that day. She was just wailing. And so I took her out. I had, the cart full of groceries and everything, and I'm a Quaker, which I decided to be in college. I went to a Quaker college, and in Rhode Island, there was a great meeting house. And when you're a Quaker, you don't proselytize. It's just not part of the religion. And it's a very quiet religion. But I was walking out to the car at the Owasso Walmart, and a couple came over to me, and they said, "You look like you just need some help today. Can we pray over you?" I was like, what is going on? And I was just like, okay.
Yeah.
And they did. And I walked away like, I don't know what just happened. That was bizarre. It was so far outside my experience up to that point. And I think about that moment, that was the perfect welcome to Oklahoma, because now I think of those people. They didn't know me. They saw this young woman who looked like crap and had a screaming baby, and they did something kind. Like how I had never met someone who would just walk up to a stranger and say, I would like to do this for you, this thing that's very meaningful to me. And I think that was Oklahoma for me, that the people here are complicated and really interesting and deep down kind. So that was pretty formative in how I started to see Oklahoma. And they didn't have fresh mozzarella at the Walmart, which in Providence, you could go to the Italian market and get it no problem. Yeah. But they had people who were willing to just offer what they could to help you in the parking lot.
Yeah. So what was happening with your writing during all of this time? When did you start getting serious about your fiction writing and write your first novel? Not the first published, but just the first one.
Sure. The first novel, I didn't write at all for several years, and fortunately the melanoma didn't spread, and I got to have another daughter. That's Sophie, and once she was in Mom's Day Out. Zoe was in pre-K, and I needed to do something. Like we were broke. My husband is a professor, but you don't wear tweed jackets and drive around in Mercedes like in the movies. So we were still broke, and I knew I needed to do something. Unfortunately, writing has not resolved, hasn't made that go. Our financial situation change that much, but at that point, I decided I wanted to go back to TU, which is where Sean teaches, and finish my degree in psychology. And I went back and I met with the chair of the department, and she told me that I had been out of grad school so long I would have to start from scratch. That I had taken more courses than they even offered at TU, but none of those credits would roll over. So we're talking like stats and intro no. So that was the come to Jesus moment. I sat on the foot of the bed. I knew deep down that I wanted to write, and I said, all right, fine, you have 1 year to write a book. Otherwise, you're going to go get recertified, because you can work as a school psychologist at the master's level, which I did have. So that's it. You're going to go be a school psychologist again, or you can write this book and give it a shot. So I wrote, Zoe came home with, those little books kids make where you staple the edges and it's just folded papers. She and her friend had written a book called Zoe and Isabella's Book of Bad Ideas. that's so cool. What would a kid write in a book about bad ideas? And I never saw what Zoe wrote. Like, it was blank at the time. She probably put a lot in there. But I wrote my first book in that year, and it was about a girl who moved to Oklahoma, and she actually had an evil teacher. I love teachers. I worked in schools. Mad respect for teachers, but this particular one was complicated and not nice. And it got me an agent. It made it all the way to the last stage of acquisitions at Scholastic. And then they killed it. And the explanation I got was that the people who did school book fairs said, we're not selling a book about evil teachers in school book fairs. But it did get me my agent. And after that, the second book I wrote was like a fantasy. It was terrible. I was trying to capitalize on Harry Potter very, very badly, and realized I do not write fantasy very well, even though I enjoy reading it. And then the third book was Scarlet Undercover, which actually did get acquired by Little Brown.
So when did you start thinking of yourself as a writer? Is it within that year, or maybe before then?
Once I finished the first novel, it was Calliope Boone was her name, that I thought of myself as somebody who wrote, but being a writer wasn't what I cared about. I wanted to be an author, which to me meant you were published. So it was after Scarlet Undercover had come out that we go to All Souls Church here in Tulsa now, and I saw a girl sitting in the hallway, and I knew her, but she wasn't reading the book because of me. She just found it, and she was reading it. I just, okay, you're an author. There's a kid actually reading your book out in the wild, and it was a million times better even than seeing Scarlett on the shelf at the bookstore.
So let's talk a little bit more about Scarlet Undercover and the main character, who's a 15-year-old Muslim American. Why create that identity for her, and what were the challenges in maybe doing that?
Scarlet happened because both of my kids went to a school that was across the street from a mosque. And it was a really small school, and they had a lot of classmates who were Muslim. And I got the idea for Scarlet. She actually started off as the character herself. I saw this beautiful little girl who looks like Scarlett looked in real life like Scarlett looked in the book. But she was at the Tulsa State Fair playing with, I think it must have been her grandfather, in the sandbox, and she looked like she had one black parent, one white parent, and her grandpa was this grizzled old biker dude, like truly he was all decked out in Harley gear. And they were in the giant sandbox that they have at the Tulsa Fair, which has gotten smaller, but it used to be just huge. And that little girl, she was just so beautiful, and it was so cool watching her play with her biker grandpa, that she became Scarlet. But the fact that Scarlett's Muslim in the book was really because my kids were at this school where they had a lot of Muslim American friends, and the Ground Zero Mosque controversy came up. And I knew these kids as kids. They were my daughter's friends. And they're hearing all of this stuff on the news about what they were raised to believe, what their family believed. Maybe they didn't. I don't know. Kids are complex. But, the things that they were taught to value, and a religion that I saw as very kind and public-spirited, they were being vilified on TV, and it pissed me off. So I wanted a character who was grappling with that, and Scarlett wasn't super observant. None of the girls that my daughters went to school with wore hijab. So Scarlett was really a reflection of their friends, who, and they had kids who later on would go across the street to the mosque on Friday for prayers, and they were just kids.
And we've talked about this a little bit about complexity and how that works just with us as humans, but creating emotionally complex characters on the page. What's your process for that? How do you make them three-dimensional and have that emotional depth?
I don't know. I do know it usually starts with a name, and I can't really develop a character until I find the right name. People ask, kids love to ask, how do you get their names? I read the credits in movies. They're great nameless. And then I also go to the Social Security database because I usually know if a character is going to be a likable character or an unlikable character. I try to find names that fit the rough idea I have in my head. But for example, one of the characters who's really despicable in a different book, his name is Vernon. And so I was very careful to go and check the Social Security database and make sure that this was a very rare name that not a lot of kids would have. So I get the name. I tend to write my way into characters. Like Stephen King says, there are seat of your pantsers and plotters, and with characters especially. They just come out as I write. And I think that's probably, characters are my favorite part of writing, probably because I grew up feeling like an outsider, moving and not having a lot of friends and watching people and studying them. My mom actually, they were in New York for about a year after I was born, and she used to take me to the Times Square McDonald's, which in 1972 is probably a pretty seedy McDonald's. And she said she could just sit me down and I would just stare at people as they walked by. So that was always, people have always interested me, and then I grew up having no choice but to study people from the outside looking in. And I lost track of where we started with that. Writing characters. Just your process. I just spend a lot of time thinking about people. My husband he doesn't hate going out to dinner with me, but when we do, he usually tries to make it so I'm looking at the wall, because otherwise I'm only half listening to him. I'm watching everybody in the restaurant.
Do you write down like snippets of conversation or that kind of thing
I am terrible. No, I don't keep notes.
Some people do.
Yeah. And it's a really smart idea because it's frustrating when you lose things that you know you had. But I don't tend to jot very much.
Yeah. So you do have to organize it and then come back and find it.
It's like I think my brain's more like a percolator. Things just kind of float around in there until they mesh together.
So what were you wanting young readers to understand the most about Scarlet Undercover? So I know everyone, when we read and we take what we take out of the work, but I was wondering if you had certain intentions with the book.
I don't think that I did, other than to show that Scarlett was a kid.
Yeah.
And I followed the format of traditional hard-boiled detective novels with that one, because I had written a couple books that didn't go, and I read someone's advice, try mimicking a form that you really enjoy. And I love hard-boiled detective stories, even though they're pretty formulaic. And some of it worked with Scarlett, some of it didn't, because some of the things that adult readers are looking for, like in a Raymond Chandler novel, like plots that don't really matter that much, don't work so well in young adult books. So get me back on track. What were we talking about?
Was there a particular message that you wanted, other than to show that understanding, that other side of who these people are saying horrible things about, like on TV or in the news?
I don't think I had the deliberate message because I'm not Muslim, and so I didn't feel like I could educate people about Islam. I did my best to do a fair depiction, and I was very careful with finding sensitivity readers who are very observant Muslims, and my daughter's classmates' parents and classmates. But I didn't go into it thinking, I'm going to show the world what Muslims are truly like. That's why Scarlett is not terribly observant. She does things that would get her in trouble with a very observant family. So no, I don't think I had a specific message. It was just I was going along, latching on to things that I thought were interesting, and trying to mix them into something that kids would want to read. Mostly I want kids to just read and enjoy the story enough to stick with it all the way to the end.
Yeah. So I wanted to kind of change topics a little bit and start asking you a few questions about Dreamland burning. Can you talk a little bit about what experience you had with this particular topic, with the Tulsa race riot, that kind of led you to even want to write about this?
I had heard, and I refer to it as both the Tulsa race riot because that's what's historically used, and also the Tulsa race massacre.
Right.
Riot is problematic because people assume that it was the Greenwood community that rioted against the white community. Also, the word riot was applied to it immediately so that insurance companies did not have to pay the victims of the burning. But massacre also, I don't love that either. I'm very respectful of whatever someone prefers to call it, especially Greenwood residents. I think massacre is much preferred, but not universally, because massacre to me implies that the Greenwood community just rolled over and was destroyed when they fought back. It was just a question of numbers. There were people fighting back hard. So I don't like implying that they were victims, but I don't want to imply that they acted like victims.
Yeah.
So language is really loaded and complicated.
Yes.
And I use both, and I talk about that with kids, the importance of words. But we had read about, my husband and I had read a series of articles the New York Times did about, and I'll call it the massacre because I default to that most of the time. We had read the series of articles about it, so I actually knew what had happened before we moved to Tulsa.
Oh, okay.
And I didn't move here and research it and think, oh, I need to know this about my new home. But over time, I started to realize, one, I really love reading historical fiction. And two, that's a story that is not out there, especially when I started thinking about it in probably 2013. There were not as many things out there for popular consumption about the massacre, and that's changing slowly, but it is changing. So I knew the anniversary was coming up in 2021. I thought if I was going to try to see if there was a story there that I felt comfortable writing, it was time to do it. And Scarlett, I actually sold Dreamland burning on spec. So I sold it with a 60-word sample and a plot outline, and so, to the same publisher, and they snapped it right up. Before that, I had been working on a story about the Osage Indian murders, and they were not interested in doing that. And it's always a tricky thing with identity politics. I now realize that a white woman representing a Native American character, even though the way I proposed it, a Native American character was not the narrator. That is a very, very tricky landscape to navigate, and my publisher was wise enough to say, you're not the person to write that book. But I had learned a little bit more about how that interconnected with the massacre, and so my next thought was to write about an event that truly, I think the massacre is a shared history. It's Oklahoma history, not just African American history. So they gave that the green light.
Was there a particular moment in just in all of the research that you did for the book that really struck you, like a photograph or hearing an account from someone who survived that day?
Not so much a single event, but I spent about 2 years doing the historical research, and that was before I started writing. I'm still doing historical research about it because we still have so few resources but there are stories out there. What struck me as I was writing it was that all of the stories of white Tulsans who had survived were either horrifying memories of the smells or seeing trucks laden with bodies being driven out of the city, or personal accounts would center around how mom and dad or grandma and grandpa hid so-and-so from the mob. And I would just go along, and every white person I spoke with who had a family member who had been alive during that time period and had spoken to them would say, oh, they hid the housekeeper in the basement or in the bedroom or meat locker. There's actually the dry cleaner just down the street used to be a grocery store, and
Yeah.
that's the story that goes with that they,
Oh, wow.
they hid African Americans in the meat locker. Nobody said my grandfather shot a bunch of people or lynched a bunch of people that night and stole stuff from Greenwood homes.
Yeah.
That struck me. And I have heard one person since then. I went to speak to a reading group at OOHRP. It was their book club. And one of the French teachers came up to me afterwards and said, my grandfather, I think he was a pretty horrible racist. And I don't know exactly what he did that night, but he did bad things. And that was the first white Tulsan who had come forward and said that.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny how in histories like this, you know, what we remember and what we tell others or what we forget, whether it's intentional or not, there's always those different sides to the story there.
And she must have pieced it together herself
Yeah.
because she knew that he had horrible views about African Americans when she was growing up. And she knew that he had been there that night. So I don't think the people who participated and weren't just passive bystanders, which unfortunately a lot of white people in Tulsa were that night. It happened and they didn't stop it. But the people who were actively murdering and burning up in Greenwood, they didn't go home and proudly announce that to their kids because they have to know somewhere deep down that is wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
So did you encounter, like when you talked about your book or whatever, did you encounter resistance from people? So for example, how did maybe white readers react to it versus African American readers? Did you get pushback due to this topic?
Very little, and I haven't quite had any locally.
Yeah.
Some reviewers don't think that a white person should be telling this story, and I respect that viewpoint. I told the story I thought I could. So my main characters are both mixed race. One is African American and white, one is Osage and white. But I didn't write the perspective of anyone from the perspective of someone who lived in Greenwood because I don't think I have the cultural roots to really describe that adequately. So my character who's watching it happen is, he's privileged because his family has money and he basically lives as a white person. And my contemporary narrator, Rowan, when she walks down the street, people see her as African American because she has brown skin, even though she's biracial. But I also had to put enough of myself in there, and I'm white. I was raised with the privileges that come with that. Yeah. And so Rowan, in a way, was a way for me to put out there, these are the things that you have to, that you experience. So this isn't coming out right because it's really complicated. Yeah. But Rowan is privileged, but she's not because she's perceived as being African American, but she's wealthy. So both the protagonists in the story are complicated. And I did that because I didn't feel comfortable writing either as purely an African American character or a purely Osage character.
Yeah, which definitely makes sense. How do librarians categorize this book? Because you mentioned this in another talk, but I just love this label. So I wanted to talk about just the whole hybrid nature of this work.
So you know that someone wrote to me to say, where should I put your book? And I said, please tell me. I don't know.
Librarian, I like that.
I think it has primarily ended up as historical fiction. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's a contemporary story. It is not a John Green book. God, I wish it was, but actually I don't. But I think it's more a historical novel because even in the contemporary timeline, she's dealing with the ripple effects of a historical event. Yeah. So that's really, I think that's what it is. Mm-hmm.
And we kind of discussed this before I started taping and put the audio on. So I was really fascinated with just time and how that worked with like Rowan and James versus Will, Ruby, and Joseph, and how one group's moving backwards, the other one's moving forwards. Tell me a little bit more about how and why you decided to do things like that and kind of go back and forth.
I didn't initially want to.
Yeah.
It was supposed to initially it started off with a boy in Tulsa now finding a gun and a Victrola. And I didn't have historical narrators. He was just going to find clues, and it was going to be him realizing what happened. And his grandfather was going to have been part of the massacre. I don't even know how, but that was the initial idea. But as I went on with the historical research, I'd come home and turn on the news or turn on the radio driving home, and there would be another shooting of an unarmed African American in the news. So it kind of took a few of those, really beating me over the head to say, this is the same thing that was happening in Greenwood, that African Americans are being killed, and there are no consequences of any real import. So I started to see that cancer that started before the massacre, it's still metastasizing, and it's so rooted in a lot of cultural institutions that I had to bring that in. I don't want anyone to walk away from learning about the massacre and think, well, I'm really glad that's in the past.
Yeah. And maybe you've addressed this a little bit already, but I was curious to know what you learned just about history and about research for this particular book and writing this story. Were there new insights that you gained about history and how it works?
I was never much of a history buff, but I love research. I like that part of grad school. I definitely learned how complicated it is and how really impossible it is to know exactly what happened, because every historical event is told through the lens of the people who record it. So I think I learned most to look for unexpected sources, and primary documents are always critical if you can get your hand on something that is either an immediate firsthand account or some sort of impartial official document that can lead you down some interesting paths. And I think the most interesting thing I found as I was writing or researching, really, we moved into Tulsa from Owasso before I had even written the proposal. And I took our, not the title, but the historical record of the house we bought.
Yeah.
I took it out, which I know you're not supposed to do. It's actually stored in a vault, but I had it in the house for a year. And so I learned about where our house is now. And it went all the way back to a piece of paper, like this ancient piece of paper, that was the U.S. government ceding the land that our house sits on to the Muskogee Creek. And then the next document is the Muskogee Creek document ceding the land to a 17-year-old young woman named America Manuel. And she was a freedwoman. So she was brown-skinned. Her family, she descended from slaves. So the first person who owned, and we live right in the middle of Tulsa, right on the edge of downtown, she was a 17-year-old mixed race woman with brown skin. And that just blew me away. Yeah. You watch the news and you hear a story about a tornado in Oklahoma, the last thing you're thinking of is how complex the state's history really is.
And just Tulsa itself as a city.
Tulsa this is all, it's a blend of Native American land, but this particular section it's Muskogee Creek land.
Yeah, because and I mentioned this to you as well before we started recording, that everyone kind of has a different Tulsa or a different point of view. Yeah. So what's your take? How would you describe Tulsa?
Home. Yeah. And I think that Tulsa and Oklahoma became home through the process of researching Dreamland. I've lived here almost 18 years now, and that is 10 years longer than I've lived anywhere else. And my kids, I have one Rhode Island kid, but she's an Okie, and I have one true Okie who was born at St. Francis in Tulsa. So if there were an easy way to describe Tulsa, I would do it, but there's just not.
It's kind of a trick question.
And I love it for that.
Yeah.
I really love it.
Yeah, I think that's maybe one of the more surprising things that people could learn.
Yeah. And even people who I might, on paper, you'd think, no way we'd get along. I love that sort of the OG Tulsans are, a lot of the white Tulsans are descended from those people who would not leave in spite of the Dust Bowl.
Yeah.
So that's some stubborn, cussed determination right there. And I think that's really shaped who we are as a state. I love it. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about your writing process. So take me through how you approach kind of the first draft, revision, final draft, maybe just kind of in general. So everything's different.
I dive right in because I know people who plot everything out ahead of time and it works great for them. And I do plot now more than I initially did. But I do write my way into things because I don't know where my head is going to take it. And the language part of writing comes fairly easily to me. And I'm working on just focusing less on making sure the words are perfect because they never are.
Right.
And usually what I write hangs together linguistically perfectly well. Plotting's really hard. And that's what I struggle with. And the only way I can know what not to write is by writing it. So I love revision. I hate drafting.
What's your favorite part about revision?
It's where, it's like, you know, those 3D things that were big in the 90s where you'd stare at it for a while and blur your eye and the actual picture would pop out at you. That's what revising is like. It's just this big hot mess before that. And I think I know what I'm saying. And I go back and I'm like, no, you had no clue what you were saying. But here's what it really is. So that's what revising is for me. And right now I'm actually, so in terms of process, I write my way into it. And I write when I can because up to now I do have both my daughters are in high school. That changes things up a little bit. I have a lot more time. I'm not picking them up. I write when I have the time.
So what's a good writing day look like for you?
I move the story forward. And that could be just in my head. I could delete every single word that I've written. As long as I got something out of that, that makes it a good day. The really amazing days are the ones where you hit that fugue state that sometimes you get when you're painting or writing or composing music. But those don't happen very often.
So how do you deal with creative setbacks? Or do you believe in writer's block?
Yes, I do, but I don't believe in giving in to writer's block.
Okay.
So go work on another section of the book. Go work on another project. But if you stop writing and try to just think your way out of it, you're screwed. You're just not going to make any progress. Walking and just hardcore sitting in front of your word processor or your notebook and just staring at it until something comes out of you because you know you're not going to let yourself get up until you write something. I also, I think movies, I love watching movies as a way to connect with the power of stories to evoke emotion in 2 hours instead of reading a whole book, which will take you more than that. So I'll watch a movie, even if I've seen it a million times, and try to think about what about that story makes it build in a way that I'm connecting with those emotional punches. And then take that back to the writing, not to make your writing a movie, but to have that immediacy of the emotion that can come with a story. I think that's really helpful.
So how do you know when a draft is ready, when the story is finished, you've done everything you can, or is there a way to even know that?
I don't.
Nothing's ever done.
I don't have people that I swap work with.
Oh, okay.
So, and I have a new agent now who's very kind and does not do a lot of harsh editing. So I just sent out a 90,000 word manuscript to a lot of editors who all said, no, thank you. So I'm revising that now. I think sometimes, right, I mean, it's a weird job. And Catherine Patterson, or I'm sorry, I think it was Catherine Patterson, said something about you have to be incredibly sensitive, but have a rhino hide, because you have to be willing to take those smackdowns and say, all right, well, I'll make it better. Even though you really thought this was a great book, it was going to just do so well. No. So what are you going to do with that? Are you going to crumple? Or are you going to go sit down and stare at the screen again and take 90,000 words down to 50,000 words and make it a better story? So that's what this is like a personal pep talk to myself right now. I am halfway through that revise, but this is a tough job. Nobody's going to love, you're never going to publish something that everybody is going to love. You have to love it. It has to be part of you. So yeah, you just have to know that's the deal going in.
So what's your best advice for writers or authors?
The one I always say is sit your butt in a chair and write, because bottom line, it doesn't happen otherwise.
Right.
But in a more helpful vein, I think it's important to take a really close look at yourself and what you're good at. And there are very few writers who just sit down and they've trained themselves, they do beautiful characters, they do perfect plotting that's paced just right, the voice always speaks to the readers, and the writing is always beautiful. And the dialogue sparkles. Everybody has something that they have to work at harder than the other things. So do a really honest evaluation of yourself as a writer. I know that I write good, well, I think that my dialogue is fine, it sounds natural. And I think that my characters, I love them and they tend to come out pretty well and their voices are okay. Plot is a bugaboo. Pacing is always hard. I feel like I'm always doing things too fast or too slow. So those are the ones that I focus on. And I don't do writing exercises to help them. I just really am very conscious of that as I'm working and very aware that you have to kill darlings. So that delete button, you just can't be afraid to use it.
So what's the best way to inspire young people to read and to read widely?
I don't like book snobs because I think it intimidates people. So for kids, I would say if a kid is reading, it doesn't matter if it's a cereal box or Tumblr's old now, whatever, an Instagram blurb beneath the picture, they're reading. And Instagram is telling stories. So acknowledge that with kids and say, all right, so how is this person telling their story on Instagram? And let them see that stories are all over. And if they want to read stories in comic books or graphics or whatever speaks to them, let them know that is just as valid as sitting down and reading War and Peace. If you're reading, if your brain is clicking into stories, then it's all good.
How do you think your work has changed over time?
I hope it's getting better. I think my plotting has gotten better. I think the first two books struggled with that a little bit. The one that didn't get published, and I think Scarlett, I could have done a better job putting a stronger plot in there. I second guess myself more now, which is not necessarily good. And I know enough, especially young adult writers who have had huge successes with their first books, and then they have to live up to that. And and I know people who will say, I'm just not the same writer I was then. I just told my story. And now they're trying to be writers. And YA is a different thing than adult literary novels. But I think it's the same everywhere, that when you sit down and write those first few books, that's just your raw want to be a writer coming out. And you have to have a story that you want to tell, otherwise you're not going to get yourself through it. Versus once you've sold a novel or two and then you're thinking, all right, this is my job now. I need to sit down and come up with, it's just such a different thing. So I think I know a lot of people who just are trying to get back to that raw, what am I going to do? What's my story?
Yeah.
And then not overthink it.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else you want to talk about today?
I feel like I've jawed away at you for a while.
Yeah. Good stuff. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, Jennifer.
Thank you. That was fun.
Appreciate it.